Hey TYT, I'm Nomi Konst. We have a special edition of What's the Latest in the Democratic Party on TYT Politics. Of course, many of you have been following the work that I actually did and I wasn't reporting on through the Democratic National Committee's Unity Reform Commission. It was a commission that both Senator Bernie Sanders and Secretary Clinton came together in agreement on creating at the convention last year in 2016 as sort of a negotiation so that Secretary Clinton would be able to receive the appropriate number of delegates so that she could win the nomination. As a result, they formed this commission. It started meeting earlier this year, and I was nominated by Senator Bernie Sanders before I joined TYT. So many of you have been asking why is all this confusion? It really was because I was a surrogate for Bernie last year, and I was very lucky and honored and grateful that I was included in this process among, a great group of fighters. So what we're going to talk about today is, you may have heard about the Democratic autopsy that's been circulating for the last couple of months. We have one of the coordinators of the national coordinator of Roots Action, who's on the task force of this autopsy report, also spent 6 years on the California Central Democratic Committee, so he's very aware of the issues that the Democratic Party has been facing at the local level, the state level, and of course the national level. And while I was on the commission last week, because it took place on Friday and Saturday, December 8th and 9th, in Washington, D.C., we received this autopsy, and we'll get to what happened. But we have Norman Soloman, who is one of the authors of this report, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Democratic Party. So thanks for joining us.
Oh, pleasure. Thanks, Nomi.
I know it's early in San Francisco, so I'm always appreciative of people, starting their day. So I want to start with, before we get to the content and the intent of the autopsy, I believe it was on Friday when we were starting off our proceedings in the commission, there were a few people in the audience who stepped up and, after trying to pass these out to each of the commissioners, they voiced their opinions and said, we've been trying to share information. This hasn't been a transparent process. People were not given the dates and times and locations of the commission. And this was, of course, the last commission meeting in which we were voting on all of the resolutions we've been writing for several months. So why did you decide to come to the commission that day and not in April or May or June or August or the one that we most recently had before that in Las Vegas? Why the last meeting?
Yeah, well, because it was the last meeting that was crucial and the votes would be taken then, the decision making on recommendations. And also really three of the task force members who really did the bulk of the work for the Democratic autopsy flew across the country, myself, as well as Karen Bernal, who's now the chair of the Progressive Caucus of the California Democratic Party, flew in, and also Pia Gallegos, a civil rights attorney based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we, as you mentioned, released the autopsy a few weeks ago. So we felt like, hey, this is an opportunity to come to that pivotal final meeting of the Unity Reform Commission and try to present in a very condensed form what the heck we came up with. And the chair of the commission was asked in a letter by Karen Bernal if it would be possible to have 5 minutes to present, and that request was declined. So, totally well-behaved men and women don't make history, and we were there to try to inject some dialogue at the very least into what otherwise was a somewhat hermetically sealed process. And I would just say, hey, if you ask people, as the DNC did, to RSVP so they can attend a meeting and then you never get back to them, that's kind of problematic, which is what happened.
And that's not the first time I've heard that. And, I want to be clear that many of us did voice frustration about that. That there was a suggestion email that was sent out, blasted out, and there was a little site that midway through the commission process, people, we asked for people's recommendations. I never saw those, and I actually brought that up, as you know, in the committee meeting. But when you had, I'm just curious, just who denied it and why did they deny your giving some sort of presentation?
Well, Jennifer O'Malley Dillon
Hmm.
was sent an email from Karen Bernal just about a week before the final commission meeting
Mm.
took place. And it's really a collegial approach because, wow, Karen had been for many years and is currently
Hmm.
the chair of the Progressive Caucus of the California Democratic Party, which by most measures is the biggest caucus of the biggest state party in the country.
Hmm.
And the reply that came back is no, you don't have 5 minutes to make a presentation. Apparently, there were no minutes available. And I mean, this is a symptom of something
Hmm.
I think much broader and deeper. And so, us being, excluded from making any presentation,
Hmm.
the effort to exclude signs from
Yeah.
the meeting, even asking a question, the effort to provide a 3-page executive summary to each member around the table, all of those pushback sort of shut him down efforts from the chair of the commission really a symptom, I'm afraid, of something much deeper. And I got to say, 9, 10 months after the ascension of Tom Perez to be chair of the DNC, the pattern's really clear.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's who you're going to believe, his rhetoric or your own eyes. His rhetoric is, oh, we're so inclusive. We want unity. We want to heal. We want to move forward. And I don't doubt the basic sincerity of that. But what's clear is that it's on the terms of the chair. And the terms of the chair was to, and I don't think this is too strong a term, purge from the pivotal Rules and Bylaws Committee of the DNC virtually every Bernie Sanders supporter. That's
And Keith
not the way.
Ellison supporters. I mean, some of them were not Bernie Sanders supporters. They had challenged. They had supported Keith Ellison as well. Like Ray Buckley was not a Bernie Sanders supporter. He didn't support anybody, but he ended up endorsing Keith Ellison and Alex
Yeah,
Drummond as well. Yeah.
right, right. So it was, you could say, perhaps payback that, hey, if you supported Bernie during the primary season or
Mm-hmm.
you supported someone other than me to be chair, then we don't want you on this committee. And I certainly would love to have a united front against this horrific Trump regime.
Mm-hmm.
However, if we're being told that we must unite behind a leadership, which is to say the chair of the DNC and Chuck Schumer in the Senate and Nancy Pelosi in the House,
Mm-hmm.
where they are both, in the case of the DNC leadership, uh, shutting down the progressive share of power on the Rules and Bylaws Committee and failing to put forward a sufficiently progressive agenda, that's a losing strategy. It's a losing strategy because if we don't have internal democracy inside a party that has its first name Democratic,
Mm-hmm.
and then we don't have as Bernie said continually and articulately in the last few years, a genuine people-based populist economic and social agenda program against racism, against economic degradation, against Wall Street power, if we're not able to move this party in a progressive winning direction, then we're in this passive role that I fear the party leadership is largely in, which is Trump's so horrible he's going to screw himself up and shoot himself in both feet. I think that was tried in 2016, didn't work, and I fear it won't happen again unless we can get ourselves together.
Yeah, this is. I mean, what I'll say, just to be a little bit of a devil's advocate here. Clearly, I think you know where I stand in terms of reforms. You were there watching as I spoke up several times.
Sure.
I have always wanted this party to be as open and inclusive, and I was a delegate for Bernie on the floor of the convention when they were stealing signs out of people's hands, and I literally saw a union activist who's been involved with the party since before McGovern in New York. Eddie K, he had a very small no TPP sign, and they were trying to escort him out of the building. And it was, this is a man in his 80s who people in New York admire and respect, and on all sides, and they were trying to escort him out because he had a sign. So I know personally how that feels, and watching that. It just, it was completely an excuse that they said saying that the hotel doesn't allow signs. That's just not true. I've been to literally rallies for the DNC chairs race at that hotel where they had signs. So, I mean, I personally, just from my perspective, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues on our side, and maybe the other members of the commission would probably agree that that was uncalled for. You don't need to call security. But what I will say as a devil's advocate is this was the commission meeting where we were voting, and all of the presentations were leading up. So we had written our resolutions, and that's where you debate the resolutions. And I know a lot of people, we had great presentations. I mean, I was surprised by some of the presentations that were put forward from reformers that opened up my eyes when it came to caucuses and the 50-state strategy, and people that have been involved with parties or progressive politics or activism over the last decades. So I'm it's unfortunate. I'm really saddened that there wasn't an opportunity to present these findings, because I think they're very much in line with what we were dealing with and what we did vote on, and we worked really hard in our resolutions. So I'm hoping that at least when the resolutions and the report comes out, you'll see a lot of things that align with what you've presented in this autopsy. And just to be clear, it's democraticautopsy.org if anybody wants to see and read it themselves. But with that being said, this is this is what a lot of folks are debating right now. Does the party want to change? Does the party want to, if they want to change, are they willing to change the message, and are they willing to change the process? And
that's why I use the word symptom, because when the public is invited a week before a meeting, and then there's an RSVP link, and then people use it and aren't responded to in any way, it is a metaphor as well as a problem itself, where if we're told that this is a public meeting and then this process or dysfunction process happens, we gotta wonder why that takes place. When I went to the DNC website that weekend and clicked on Unity Reform Commission, I got a link that gave me a chance to sign up for the Las Vegas meeting of the Unity Reform Commission. I mean, it's, we can chalk it up to, kindly say incompetence, but I think it's something more than that. And what's most important by far is power. Let me cite not Karl Marx or Thomas Jefferson, but Lewis Carroll, when Humpty Dumpty is speaking in Through the Looking Glass to Alice, and she's so befuddled by this sort of dual discourse of having words mean so many different things by convenience, and she asks Humpty Dumpty, well, the question is how you can make one word mean so many different things. And the reply from Humpty Dumpty is, the question is, who is to be master? That's all. And so here at the end of 2017, we're faced with the crucial question, who is to be master of the DNC and of the Democratic Party nationally? And I fear there's this rhetoric, and the autopsy, which, as you mentioned, is at democraticautopsy.org on the web. The autopsy, I think, articulates what millions of activists and others around the country feel, and that is the Democratic Party can't have as its master both the working class and Wall Street. And we still have leadership that has, as we say in the report, this claim that you can have victims without victimizers. And it's not a personal thing to me at all, but when you see Tom Perez went out many months ago on a unity tour with Bernie Sanders, and Tom Perez, he won't name Wall Street. He goes out of his way to say, we're not picking a fight with these people. We, in effect, he says, as the leader of the party, the DNC, he says, we support the victims of an unequal system, as though then we don't have to complete the sentence and say, and we're willing to challenge the victimizers. And I think that's where we are right now. And my fear is, if we just sort of set aside the incidents of the last several weeks and even months, is that going forward, as I agree, tremendous progress, insufficient, but real progress made, embodied in the recommendations of the Unity Reform Commission, it goes now to a Rules and Bylaws Committee that is absolutely antithetical to the verbiage that we get from the top of the party about we're going to have unity by us all being represented fully. And I think this is the challenge, or one of them, that we face going into next year.
I mean, we definitely brought that up during the commission. As you know, Dr. Jim Zogby was very frustrated as somebody who's been on the executive committee, and he's been involved with the party for many years. The two of us were on the, and Gus Newport were the representatives from Bernie Sanders on the party reform committee. So we were very focused on the process of the party and the budget and the oversight. And essentially, we put in all this time and effort and money. I mean, at a time when the DNC is cash strapped, it cost a lot of money to create this commission. And then it goes to a Rules and Bylaws committee where 5 of the members of our commission from the other side are on the Rules and Bylaws committee and not one representative from our side. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be, aren't going to be some people on that Rules and Bylaws committee who are willing to take these recommendations seriously. And frankly, I think that it would look really bad if the members from the commission didn't vote for the recommendations. I think that's, right. If there's one thing they're learning from this process, is that people are paying attention to the process. Now, I'll tell you from past meetings, people were showing up because I was tweeting out where it was, and then it would get shared. I know because they came up to me and said, you shared this, and then Our Revolution shared it, but that's the only way they knew where the event was taking place. And as the commission went on, we would find out, the commissioners would find out details later and later and later, and reporters would call me up and I'd say, I can't believe you don't even know. This is crazy to me. So I'm equally as frustrated with some of these things, which are just, I'm pretty sure the Democratic Party has been operating like this for a long time, and they've been getting away with it. It's been operating out in the open, delay, and then rush things at the end. But with that being said, people are paying attention now. So it's not as easy to get away with. And you also have a faction like us, who we won't be in the room in the Rules and Bylaws Committee, and we're underrepresented in most of the committees, but we are members of the DNC. Many of us are members of the DNC. Some are even chairs of state parties, and some are even in officer positions. But there are more and more people that, listen, Keith Ellison almost won, right? He almost won the most insider game possible, and some would argue that if there weren't some last-minute changes, he probably would have won. Here we are almost a year later. The commission is over. I can bet you that the numbers are moving more and more in the favor of reformers.
That's because the base of the party, the grassroots, people who are both activists and just paying attention, and even semi-not paying attention, they want the party to move in a more progressive direction. And we have this tremendous split going on. I mean, I think one of the takeaways to me is underscoring more than ever that this is a fight that has to be fought within the party. And there would have been no Unity Reform Commission without the tremendous historic progressive campaign of Bernie Sanders in 2016. There would have never been a representation that we had, a strong 8 people who are progressives on the commission, without that grassroots organizing that's been going on throughout this year, as well as last year and the year before. And we would not have a shot at the real substantial reform, insufficient though it is, but substantial reform that the commission report lays out in terms of recommendations, if not for the cumulative effects, not only of the Occupy movement, but the Bernie campaign and everything that's come since. So I think part of what we need to take to heart is not to just trash the Democratic Party, but to say that there is a critique to be made. It's being articulated in many forms by people in terms of citing evidence and sharing analytical tools to understand the power, and then to say we have to take this fight into 2018 and beyond. And I got to say, too, every time I do an interview with a progressive outlet, I get the emails, give up on the Democratic Party, why are you bothering? It's a waste of time. And my response is, hey, you want to get rid of a Republican majority in the House, a Republican majority in the Senate? Tell me any plausible, not hallucinogenic, but plausible scenario for doing that next year. And there is none. Right. It's only the Democratic Party. If you don't want this fascistic guy Moore to be the senator from Alabama, what would be the scenario? So, I mean, yes, we have to be visionary with our eyes on a horizon that we help to create to be more wonderful, but we've got to have our feet on the ground. And that's why I say to people, progressives need to build strong social movements, and that effort has to include this fight for a progressive Democratic Party.
And I think that's well spoken, and I think the numbers are going down. I look at analytics at least on this stuff, and after this commission some of the conversations that came out of the commission, I think some people start to understand why the party, there needs to be. I think a lot of folks just thought, oh, whatever, they're always going to control us. But the truth is, the numbers are getting smaller and smaller. There are more, believe it or not, Hillary people who are like, we want to win, and that strategy did not win us these races. So it's time that we switch to another strategy. So why would you give up when you're so close? That's what I don't understand. This is the closest progressives have ever been to taking over the party in recent history. And all right, let's turn around, take our ball, go home, and just like let them continue to control. Why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense.
There's a great aphorism that came from a strategist many decades or centuries ago, and it's attributed to a Chinese tactician who said, when you're in a struggle with an adversary, don't do what you most want to do. Do what your adversary least wants you to do. And I think in this situation, if we describe the adversary as the forces of racism that's institutionalized, of militarism, of corporate power, of Wall Street domination, of economic, by any other word, exploitation, those adversaries of our progressive values want us to take that ball and go away from the Democratic Party. They want us out of the party, and they want to control the party all the more strongly and eliminate our chances of transforming it in a positive direction. They want us to go away. They want us to go off and yet again chase this fantasy of an effective third party. And to sort of close that loop, what would I most want to do if it didn't matter what the results were? I'd love to work on another party, but that's, I think, what our adversaries are hoping we do. And I think we've just got to redouble our efforts to make the Democratic Party democratic and progressive.
And if there's any place that proves it's possible, it's California. It's not perfect, but California, it very quickly was able to reshape the internal structure of the Democratic Party in the last year, and I think, it's probably the closest in the country in terms of taking over a large party that was once controlled by corporate interests. I think there's probably almost an equal balance at this point, except for the major leaders.
I'm impressed by it. I mentioned Karen Bernal. Well, she, time and again, has been reelected to chair, as I said, what is by most measures the largest caucus in the party in the state. And Karen Bernal has engaged in it. It's such a big state. She goes up and down the state continually. She's organizing. She was a spark plug and a great analyst with her work. And as I said, we didn't have this autopsy in hand until the beginning of November. So we said, well, okay, this is the time not only to surface it nationwide, but then to try to make its presence felt at the final meeting of the Unity Reform Commission. And what Karen's working on now includes a solidarity around the country with people to strengthen, if there are progressive caucuses within state parties, or to form them if they don't exist. And I think that opens an opportunity to say that the Bernie campaign of 2016, it was a beginning. I mean, both Karen and I were delegates to the National Convention for Bernie. And one anecdote, which I think sort of epitomizes the struggle between the old that discredited the new that has to be created. We went to our statewide meeting of Bernie delegates, and we were told from the top of the state party that it's traditional for the chair of the candidate's delegation to the National Convention to be the highest ranking state party official to be in office. And we said, well, it's traditional not to be democratic, lowercase d, but we are democratic in our movement here. And Karen was elected, along with Bill Honigman from Progressive Democrats of America, to co-chair the Bernie delegation from California to the National Convention. And to me, that's symbolic as much as anything else. Because, hey, if we just go by tradition, we are sunk.
Yep, that's exactly it. Norm Soloman, the Democratic Party in Crisis, the Autopsy, you guys can find it online. That is democraticautopsy.org, O-R-G. Fascinating read. I look forward to continuing this conversation and seeing what happens in the new year and how the Rules Committee takes the recommendations we put forward. And my work is done mostly on the commission, so hopefully I'll be able to talk more about the Democratic Party soon. But I really appreciate your work. And again, thank you for coming. I know that many of us were in commission roles, but we wanted to make sure that all voices were heard. And if we're going to talk about transparency and being an inclusive party and instituting reforms, I mean, it didn't hurt to have sheets of paper where we could read during the commission meetings. I mean, it wasn't going to, it was ridiculous. And to take signs from people. So just thank you. Thank you for coming out to DC, and on behalf of progressives, thank you for being there fighting for us.
Well, much appreciation for the work that you and 7 or other delegates I saw, or members of the commission, accomplished, because you showed what can be done when you stick with it and you keep fighting good fights. So thank you to you for all that you've been doing, and onward and upward. We've got, as the saying goes, we've got a world to win for the values that we really cherish.
That's it. Thank you so much.